In this episode of Paint Society, we're gonna go over all the different types of sanders when it comes to sanding down your car and getting it painted so you can make the right choice for your project. And I know how confusing it can be with all the different options on the market. Do you go electric or do you have to get one run by air? Well, today we're gonna be using our C5 project to prep panels. We're gonna have a little bit of Bondo, and I'm gonna tell you exactly which sander you're going to need for your project to help get the job done as quick as possible. Now let's start with the cheapest option that you can get at your local hardware store. I picked this up actually on Amazon for 40 bucks, and most of you guys are gonna wanna run for this type of sander. This sander can be used for a lot of different reasons, but can you use it to sand a car? I'm gonna give you my opinion on this $40 sander and see, is it a sander that can be used for auto body, or should you just leave it for your home renovations? And this is the Black & Decker sander, and this actually has what we call hook and loop. Basically, all that means is it is Velcro. This sander only came with one piece of sandpaper, but that's fine because we are going to use our 6-inch paper and cut it down to use for our 5-inch sander. Now this actually comes with a little mini vacuum, which is good because it will help keep those contaminants and dust within this little bag. Now the one thing you're gonna love about the sander is that it plugs right into 120 volts, what most of you guys at home are really going to want. Now with this particular sander, it only comes in one speed, fast. That's at 1200 RPM. So you're gonna have to really work with it and move with it because it will move fast. Now, one suggestion I do have for you is never use it without what we call an interface pad. And these interface pads I picked up, and what this will do is soften the scratch and take away the aggressiveness of the actual sander so that you can get a nice, smoother finish. Basically, it just sticks right on there, and what it becomes is essentially a cushion between that hard pad and a soft cushion for the actual sandpaper for when it hits the panel. Let's go over to our C5 and see how well it works. Now here in our door, we're gonna be using a 400 grit to really kill the dead paint that's at the top here and scuff up the rest of the surface. Now we're gonna stay away from our mirror because we have yet to remove it, but we generally want to sand down this area. Let's see how well it collects the dust. Pretty impressive for a first time using one of these sanders. Using that interface pad, it effectively cushioned the scratch. It took away the aggressiveness of the sander, and we have a beautiful 400 grit scratch right here. And if you had used a much more expensive sander, you wouldn't know the difference, to be honest with you. Now the sander worked great on the clear coat, but what about primer? A rougher primer of 400 grit, will it eat through the primer and smooth it out? I also noticed that it doesn't really collect dust, but again, it's not a vacuum sander. Let's go ahead and see what it can make of this primer. And we can see how the primer really gets the paper clogged up because it's a different material. However, the sandpaper and the sander still did the job, and this is a completely smooth finish. One difference between a sander and by hand is a sander will leave a finer scratch. So if you're using a 400 by hand and a 400 by sander, the 400 by sander with the interface pad is going to leave a scratch that you can put paint over, whereas 400 by hand, you might see some of those scratches when you go to paint. So very important to always finish with a sander if possible. For 40 bucks, this is really winning right now. And we have a little bit of filler here we're going to be knocking down with our sander. Now this should always be blocked to finalize it, but you can always use the help of a sander to really just get that initial coat nice and flat and then finish it by hand. And just a little bit of hand sanding on a block will finish this job up nicely and it'll be ready for primer. You can see here now it's nice and flat, it's nicely feathered in, and this is ready for primer. Let's check out our other options. We're gonna stick with the electric side. So we saw a $40 sander. Now let's take a look at a $500 sander. Now a $500 sander is gonna be for someone that can really utilize it for professional use, whether it's woodworking or auto body or whatever it might be. I wouldn't go buy a $500 sander if you're gonna paint your car one time. It makes no sense. And this sander is coupled with the 3M extract. So this system is going to suck up any of the dust. So we're not gonna have any dust like we saw with the $40 sander. But again, not a big deal if it's your first time painting a car, if you don't intend to paint anyways after this. So some differences you'll see between that cheaper sander and a more expensive. First off, you're gonna get a bigger diameter sanding surface, 6 inches. And then you're gonna have the different variable speeds. So we'll go ahead and power on. Now, the way that this works is you have that toggle, so you can kind of bring it on slow and then faster, and you can set it at low speed. So let's say you have an area that you don't really want to burn through, whether you're wet sanding or whatever it might be, and you want to be at a low speed, that's going to be the type of speed, and it's maxed out at that. So we'll bring it all the way up to the top. You can see we have many different settings here, up to 7 speed settings. Well, we don't have the vacuum on now, but you see that cloud of dust, it really moves. So a sander just like this is going to have the capability to also be a vacuum sander, which we see right here. And obviously it's gonna be made a lot better than a cheaper sander. So professional use, $500 is a lot. Is it worth it? That's up to you to decide. But let's check it out on the vehicle and we'll show you how the dust extraction really does work. And we will be using that same sandpaper, the Kovacs P400 sandpaper. And what we want to do is make certain that we go ahead and line up those holes so we get that vacuum. So we can see all the dust that we have here on the surface using our other sander. You can see how it's just collected here. And we're going to use it over on this side. And we're going to take a look after and see if there's that amount of dust on the surface. Oh, we just stopped sanding on the quarter panel. You can see on the front door, using the cheaper sander with the no vacuum, we can see the difference here, how the dust is all collected. Not a big deal, but if you're in a shop that requires it, it is nice because it keeps the cars nice and clean and cleaner paint jobs in the end. But right now, the $40 sander, it'd be my first choice if I was new to painting cars and just wanted to sand down my car. Let's now see how the 3M extract sander does on this hood. Same piece of sandpaper, just like the $40 Black & Decker. One thing I did notice and I do like about the 3M sander is it covers a larger area more effectively. And here's why. Remember how we talked about the different speed settings on the actual control? Well, why is that important? Well, because when you are sanding, you're supposed to sand low and slow, and that's going to get you the most effective cut. Sometimes with the other sanders with a higher RPM, like the Black & Decker, well, what can happen to the sandpaper is what we saw before. It's not really cutting, it's just smearing the surface. So what we're able to do here is by lowering the speed, we can effectively utilize the sandpaper much better. It's not all about how fast you can do it, but slow down to speed up. And that's just what we got here with a 3M sander. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our air compressed options. Now there's 3 different options when it really comes down to sanding. You have your 3/8 throw, your 3/16 throw, and your 3/32 throw. Well, we're not going to be doing a 3/8 throw. We have our 3/16 throw and a 3/32 throw, and then a smaller DA with a 3/16 throw. Now, basically, that 3/16 throw is going to be your most common sander. It's smooth enough and tough enough to cut through your fillers, to cut through your primers and your clear coats. That 3/32, well, that's going to be more for your refinishing, your final prepping, or your sanding for polishing. In all honesty, I would save the 3/32 DA for if you're doing something like high-end polishing, show car finishing, that type of thing. This is a great sander, and it's going to leave the smoothest sand scratch because it's got the smoothest rotation, but it is a slower sander. It doesn't cut as fast. So in body shop, what we're going to be using mainly is our 3/16. Now our 3/8 on the other hand, that's going to be a little bit more for cutting down old paint, or if you have surface rust or something like that. Something we don't do too much on this channel, but that still is a great option to have. But your workhorse is going to be this sander right here. And this sander is what I use each and every day in the body shop. It's my go-to sander, so much that I ended up picking up another one for home. The guys over at Kovacs make a great sander, and I love it. That's why I needed to have two. Now, this sander comes in two options. It comes in a vacuum style sander, so if you want to hook up that 3M extracts to it, you can, and it comes in just the regular version as well. Now, for sanding outside, this will probably be something that I end up using. That way I don't have to worry too much about the dust. Now, one cool feature that will come on these sanders is the variable speed here. So similar to the electric, you can set it. I like to have it at the maximum, but you can really control it here with the amount that you press down on a trigger. Whereas with the electric, it's just each button will maximize that each setting. Here you can have all the full settings, but you can just trigger it as you go. And that's something that's nice to do because you can just hold it right here. It's a nice firm grip and a great DA sander. It's not going to break down on you. I've had mine in the shop for about over 4 years now, and it is just solid. So let's go ahead and fix it up and talk real quick about our air compressor and the reason why a DA sander might be more for the professional use at a shop rather than at home. Now, this is our compressed air system, and I have yet to use it with the DA sander. Now, this is the Eastwood 3060, and it really works well to really build that pressure back up when it's only got a 30-gallon tank, but it's supposed to function just like a 60. So if you're at home, you're gonna need a large compressor because it's gonna need that continuous air. Now, usually when you're at the shop, that's not a problem because they have the big compressors that can handle the large air consumption. But let's go ahead and take a look and see how well it works. And again, we have our 3/16 Kovacs Pro Max sander, and this is an air sander. So we'll hook up our air, and we have an air connection here, and we'll set it all the way to max. And you can see how we can control it a little and then go all the way just by holding it all the way down. This really makes you more effective when you're working, especially in an environment of a body shop where you have to produce and move fast. Just that control here makes all the difference. Let's go ahead and test it out on a vehicle. So we're gonna start here with our P400 grit. Now, what we wanna do is we wanna go over the whole surface, and we might step it down to a 320 because we have some oxidized clear here, and we wanna make sure it's completely off and smoothed off before we put our primer down. So we might have to go down to 320, but first, let's start with our 400 and prep out this panel. We were able to prep this out pretty quickly. Now, the main differences you're gonna see with a air sander is the size, all right? And how easy and fast it cuts. Since the mechanism is not really built in here for electricity, you can really have a smaller, more compact sander because the electric sanders are either taller or they're longer, like we've seen with the Black & Decker and the 3M. But this is a lot more compact, rips through the clear coat much quicker. Something that really doesn't matter at home at all, but when you're in a production setting and you need a sander, this is going to be more of the sander of your choice that you're going to want to go with. Now, I've had all the sanders in the world, even a Husky $50 sander, that it does last for a little bit, but after a while they do break down. So you want to spend some money to get a quality tool if you're really going to be in this trade for a while. One thing I did notice that the top surface was just a little bit too trash for 400 grit, so we're going to switch it out to 320 and we're going to hit up that top surface. And if we focus in and take a look, there's a lot of dead paint. There's some still residue here from the wrap, and we have minor cracking in some areas. So we really want to knock this area down with 320 just because we want the primer to bite into it, create a new nice smooth surface for when we go to prime and then eventually sand that primer down for paint. Now, I'm always going to recommend using the interface pad, and I'll link everything in the description so that you can have it for your own project. And the interface pad really takes the surface and it conforms to the DA much nicer, at least a much nicer sand scratch. So let's go ahead and sand down this top area. And the final sander we're going to look at is the Astro. It's a 3/32 sander. Now, my original intent when I got this sander was to prep my panels for blending and clear coating. And I did that for a little while, but it was just very, very slow. I found this sander really works best for really, really nice high-end jobs that you're cutting and buffing, because it leaves such a soft scratch with the rotation of a 3/32 throw that the scratch can be buffed easier. But I'm going to show you the difference here with a 3/32 sander. Again, the rotation is different, and prepping with it, the speed, even the sound of it is much different. So let's go ahead. We have a P400, and we're going to use that primarily below the top of the door because we'll cut it with a 320 at the top. And let's see the difference. So if we stop for a brief moment, if we look over here at a quarter panel where our 3/16 sander was, you can see how uniform and how chalky the clear coat is. It's a nice uniform sanded clear coat. Now, running over here, we did a couple passes and we can see some areas still need some sanding. That is because it has taken the sandpaper and has a much finer rotation. It's not that aggressive with the sanding. Again, it will get the job done, but the scratches within the clear coat are finer here than they are over here. Is that necessarily needed for base coat and clear coat? I found out it doesn't matter. Personally for me, it does not matter. I'd rather have the speed of a 3/16 rather than the refinement of a 3/32 sander. Nonetheless, it will do the job, and we're going to finish it up here. It'll just take a little bit longer. We just finished sanding with our 3/32 sander. Now I'm going to show you this little 3-inch sander that everyone should have in their collection. It's really nifty because it can get into different areas. You can use it for primer, you can use it for filler work, you can use it for clear coat, even higher grits you can use for sanding and polishing. And I love it so much that I always like to use it in the tightest areas. Now, for those of you that aren't going to plan to take anything off, this will definitely help you get into those areas. In our case, we're still waiting on the window switch to move down the window so that we can get the mirror off, but for the sake of the video, let me show you how well it can get into smaller areas. And for those small areas, it just gets right up to the edge really easily. And it also works well for tight areas just like this. And as for our compressor, it really held up with our air sanders. It kicked on about maybe 3 or 4 times throughout the sanding of the vehicle and held the pressure on the sander perfectly. Well, where does that leave us, and what is my top picks for you as a do-it-yourselfer and you as a professional? Well, first off, I gotta say I was really impressed by the electric sander. For something you would use for household projects, it did the job on the vehicle. Now, I will tell you, I am going to link another sander that has up to 6 variable speeds as well, and the same price. This just has that 1 speed. Although it is built very well, I would probably recommend something with a little bit more variable speeds so you can control it. I also would recommend and tell you, do not use the sander without the interface pad. The interface pad is 100% needed when sanding because it really contours and softens up that scratch and makes the sander that much more usable when it comes to auto bodies. So if you're at home and it's your first time, you're gonna refinish your vehicle, or you wanna start getting into it, you can grab one of these sanders and it will work for you. Just be careful with those high speeds because it can do a little bit of damage if you're not controlling it. Now, as for that 3M Extract $500 sander, do you need it? Absolutely not. It's more of a desire rather than a necessity. For me, I want to keep the garage clean, and I definitely see a big difference between using the basic electric sander or even the air-powered sander without the vacuum assist. This really does collect the dust and keeps everything contained, and that's really important to me, especially at my age, to take care of myself and my environment. So for the price tag that comes along with it, it will do the job. But if it's your first time sanding down a car, I don't really recommend spending this much money. You don't need it. You can get the same results from a $40 sander. Now, when it comes to professional use, we're gonna wanna be using our air compressors because we have a lot more control and we can move much faster through the vehicles. Working in the auto body center, it's more about production and doing it efficiently with quality. And that's just what I found here with the Pro Max sander. I've been using it for a number of years and using it right here in the home garage. It's got the same exact results. For a price tag in and around 270 bucks, it gets the job done and it's quality built, so it's gonna last you for a lifetime. Now, when it comes to that 332nd sander, this is one that you're gonna wanna keep in your toolbox, but you're not gonna use that frequently, but you're gonna be happy when you have it and you wanna put that beautiful shine without a whole lot of buffing, because this is going to put down a nice, soft sand scratch, although it will take a little bit longer for you to get that nice, smooth finish sanded. When you go time to buff it, those sand scratches will not be as aggressive. And believe me, when it comes to buffing, we need all the help we can get because buffing is not my favorite job to do. Now, that little 3-inch sander, not a necessity, but I'll tell you, if you have it, you're gonna love it. I like to use this little sander on headlights when really the headlight lens is small. You can really control the sander in those tight little areas. So a little 3-inch, 3/32 sander really gets the job done. It's good to have in your collection as well. Now, I really hope this helped get you closer to making a decision when it comes to sanding. And do you need a sander? Can you sand your car by hand? Of course you can. But just keep in mind, if you do it by hand, it's gonna have a more aggressive sand scratch, so you might have to step up your grit again and resand the whole vehicle. For instance, if you finish with a 400 grit by hand, well, you're probably gonna wanna finish it with a 600 grit wet because that's gonna be a smoother scratch. Rather with a sander, you can finish it with 400 on an interface pad, and most of the time that's going to be good enough to put solid color right over, or even a sealer. So keep that in mind when it comes to your project as well. I hope this helped you make a better decision when it comes to sanders. And guys, this is Brian from Paint Society reminding you, don't overthink it. It's just paint. I'll see you guys on the next episode.